Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy and editor of its EV-focused sister site, The Driven. And joining me, as usual, is ITK principal David Leitch. David, I trust you are well because it's been a very, very busy week.
Giles, I'm well. Sounds like I'm healthier than you this week, which is an unusual occurrence. And yes, it's such a busy week that we actually needed to script this little show today.
We haven't done very well, though, have we?
No, we haven't. But the big news, of course, is the emissions emissions reduction target for 2035. And
well, I'd just like to flag, first of all, that a lot has happened since we last had a podcast. We've had the approval of the Northwest Shelf, that carbon bomb of Woodside. We've had what have we had? We've had the big battery storage tender. We've had the climate risk report. We've had global wind industry meeting. We've had the Queensland Clean Energy Summit. And then we arrived today with the emissions reduction target, 62 to 70%. We've got two interviews today, one with Matt Kean from the Climate Change Authority and later on with Andy Evans, offshore wind pioneer. David, before we get into the Matt Kean interview, do you want to say anything beforehand?
No, I think we should start out with Matt Kean. It's always, as I make clear in the podcast, in the interview, it's always a pleasure to listen to what Matt has to say.
Let's do it then. We just caught up with Matt Kean this afternoon in amongst a whole bunch of interviews that he was doing, and let's have a listen. Matt Kean, thank you very much for joining Energy Insiders on a very busy day.
Giles, David, thank you for having me on my favourite energy podcast.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so. It's a very important day. Now, the first question that was asked of the press conference I'm going to ask here, which was basically the fact that the Climate Change Authority made it clear that it was canvassing a target between 65 and 75, and eventually you came out with a number between 62 and 70. Why did it go down? What did you find that wasn't working or wasn't transitioning quickly enough that caused you to revise down that number?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is we didn't lower our target range. We initially consulted on a range of 65 to 75. So a discussion paper went out actually before I was the chair of the Climate Authority. And that was part of our deliberative approach to ensure that our final recommendation was robust and achievable. And during that process, we received over 500 public submissions and conducted over 560 events and meetings, many of which I participated in personally. And what we found during that process is this is hard. This is really hard. Think about the space that you're in, the rollout of renewable energy. We've seen supply chain constraints, we've seen labour shortages, we've seen social licence issues, and generally frustration through the planning process in getting a lot of these projects approved. Just
sorry to interrupt there. So is that then a recognition that things, the fact that the renewable energy rollout has not gone according to plan, it will probably be delayed, and what get to 82% by 2031 or 2032, maybe. Is that the reason for a lower than hoped for range?
I think it's recognition that this is challenging. These are challenges to be overcome, but I've got every confidence we can do that. We've got a lot of the policy architecture in place to be able to speed things up. But what we got from that, I guess, ground truthing exercise is recognition from industry and those on the coalface required to reduce their emissions, so to speak, have said that with the technologies available to us today, that is a bit of a rate limiter as to where we can get to.
Excuse me, not the coalface, the front line.
The front line, yes, indeed. Pardon the pun. Sorry, David. Thank you. But the challenge for us was to hand up something that was ambitious and anchored in the science, but it needs to be achievable. There's no point putting a target out there that we just can't deliver on, because that will then see industry, that will see business investment say, well, that's not realistic, and walk away. So we needed to get the balance right. And I feel this number does that. 62 to 70 from the economic modelling we've done and the ground truthing exercise that we've pursued has clearly demonstrated that this is achievable, and it's done so against a backdrop of continued strong economic growth, rising national incomes, and increases in real output from all sectors of the economy based on values and volumes. So we think we've got the target right that's in the national interest.
Okay. Now, there's a few cynics out there, of course, and he sort of said that a modelling report will always sort of deliver what the person that asked for it wanted. Can you just sort of clarify whether you had to manipulate your numbers to satisfy any sort of political considerations?
No, the Climate Change Authority Act actually requires us to consider a number of things, including the science, but also the economic impact, the social impact, the public interest, equity issues. There are a range of considerations that we had to take into account to advise the government on the NDC. And don't forget, the Paris Agreement also requires us to put forward something that calls on countries to set their highest possible ambition, taking into account their national circumstances. And that's why the up approach that we did shows that we've done exactly that. So, this is not easy. The assumptions that I've made in terms of the transition are that we implement AEMO's step change scenario. That will require about 84 gigawatts of new renewable capacity installed in the system in the next 10 years. It'll require about 5,000 kilometres of transmission lines being built. I mean, in the last 5 years, we've built 1,200 kilometres of transmission lines. So we have to double that and some to deliver just on the electricity and energy component. And we've put ambitious assumptions in the model around electric vehicles, around the safeguard mechanism, and also the amount of land that will be required to sequester carbon as well. So anyone that's suggesting this is not ambitious clearly is not being upfront with the Australian people.
Well, it's good to see, and we're not on the video actually, because that wasn't possible, but I think you're sitting in the front seat of an electric car at the moment, so thank you for doing your effort, your part on that one.
After I just got off the Sydney Metro, and this is one thing, but part of some of the rate limiters on these things are building infrastructure like better public transport so that people can utilise them. We've made assumptions around the uptake of electric vehicles, which we know by 2030 are going to be, the capital cost of them is going to be cheaper than existing internal combustion engine vehicles, let alone the total life cost. So we think the economics will provide a slipstream for the rollout of these things, as we're seeing with renewables. And we're making recommendations that we can get on with it. If we deploy it at scale, then we can hit and beat these very ambitious targets that we've put in place.
And on that ambition, just the last question before I hand over to David, I was surprised to hear Chris Bowen say that he thought 70% was the absolute maximum that could be achieved. And I think you said that you thought we can do better, and probably for the science we need to do better. And there was plenty others, such as Fortescue and other people who thought that it should be a floor rather than a ceiling. What are you seeing that Chris Bowen is not?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that we've put some flexibility. The reason we've recommended a range is to put some flexibility in there so that we can handle any challenges that are thrown at us. The other thing that I'd the point that I'd make to your listeners is that there is a technical and feasible pathway to achieve that range based on the technologies that we have available to us today. And we think that there will be surprises on the upside. Take, for example, the modelling of the CSIRO in 2015 on this topic. It didn't even have electric vehicles in the modelling. So there will be surprises on the upside. What we've done is ground truthed it based on the technologies that are available to us today. And what we also know is that rolling out those technologies, take, for example, renewable energy, we can also lower cost of living pressures for families and businesses, continue to grow our economy, drive investment, and create jobs. So these things are in the national interest. And one of the things that your listeners will be interested in is that work of the CSIRO. And that work has clearly established, clearly and undeniably, that Australia's clean energy transition is an economic growth opportunity, not a good drag. There is a path that will deliver benefits and savings, not costs. And that's been confirmed by our leading scientific body, the CSIRO, who have done the work.
I personally, I've got two sayings for you, one religious and one from business. And the one from business, which I think successful business have, is under promise, over deliver. And so I'm fine with a target that seems on the low side if it can be actually delivered, when better. And the other one is from the religious side of things, which I think is, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, which has been the case so far, that everyone's trying, but we haven't achieved as much as we might have. Nevertheless, I like to hear you because you talk like a politician, which like a good politician, and we don't hear enough of that sort of stuff. I read in the newspapers that the Liberal Party has speaks with one voice in shadow cabinet federally to reject this target. If you were running the Liberal Party federally these days, what would you be saying to the members?
I'd be saying the same thing that I'm saying to the government and to the Australian public, and that is we should be making a target that protects our planet for future generations, but also one that continues to future-proof our industry, our economy, our way of life, and our planet as well. And we can do both. Clearly, what we've done here is a comprehensive and robust exercise that puts forward a target steeped in science, but that is absolutely achievable against a backdrop of continued economic growth. And Australia is a country that delivers on its promises. And I wanted to be able to stand up there at the press conference today and talk to your listeners and everyone else and say that this is in the national interest. And I'm confident that's exactly where we've landed. And you've seen the people on the extreme right and the extreme left coming out and opposing this. Well, that shows you this is exactly where it needs to be.
And, I think I look forward to you and Minister Bowen and everyone else standing up in 3 years' time, executives at Jen Taylor's and at wind developers and solar developers, and saying, look, this is what we've actually done. This is the infrastructure that we've built, and the transmission companies, instead of saying this is what we're going to do and this is a good target. And we have come a long way. And I just want to stay on the politics because I see in New South Wales that, there's been a continuity of policy. And I just wondered, federally again, if the National Party and the Federal Liberal Party worked more constructively, do you think we could actually get lower prices for consumers and get the job done better?
Well, that's exactly what the Liberal and National Party that I was a part of in New South Wales did. We made decisions based on the evidence, the economics, and the science. And don't take my word for the benefits of this energy transition. Take the word of the Australian Energy Market Commission, who say that a coordinated renewables rollout between now and 2050 will see, on average, household bills fall by 20% per annum. Again, the problem is not too many renewables in the system when it comes to the increasing cost of energy. The problem is that there are not enough renewables in the system. We need to deploy more renewables in the system because we know that is the most important thing that will lower household bills and protect us from global energy shocks like we saw with the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine, where wholesale prices went through the roof.
I just couldn't agree more. The single thing that you ask yourself, why are prices in Victoria low relative to prices in other states? And it's because there's more supply than demand relatively. And that's you cannot close anything until you build new supply. And yet you've got the National Party absolutely bitterly opposed to building anything as far as I can see. To me, it's the political, they're making life difficult for everyone. For what political end? Is it for the end of their voters, who have to pay higher electricity prices as a result? And lose the benefits of the regional development as well as the costs that come with it.
Well, I can't speak for the National Party other than to say when I was a member of Parliament, which I'm not anymore, I'm a recovering politician these days, David, but I worked closely with the National Party. John Barilaro, who would be known to many of your listeners, worked to focus our policies on things that will deliver investment in the bush, jobs in the bush, and lower household bills. And that's how we came up with the electricity infrastructure roadmap. And that's forever to John and the National Party's credit, where they put the regions first rather than politics. And that worked successfully for the New South Wales Coalition. And it's great to see that the federal Labor government is embracing this target, which focuses on lowering household bills, growing our economy, and also protecting our planet from the dangers of global warming.
And, what about the national security side of things? It seems to me that oil imports are a big kind of risk, and that other countries are going to be reducing their coal imports. I think China this year is down already. And with EVs and stuff like that, we're actually growing our energy independence, aren't we? Because as much as we are a net exporter of energy, the second or third biggest in the world, we're still critically dependent on oil imports, aren't we?
Well, let me make this point to your listeners. Australia is a small contributor to global emissions. We're also a small open market economy. We've relied on trade internationally to underwrite our prosperity for generations. And the reality is today that 84% of global GDP has committed to net zero emissions by 2050. Okay, so we can either ride that wave and increase our prosperity as the world transitions, or we can ignore it and get left behind. The numbers that we've put in the table, backed in by the CSIRO's modelling, looking at taking full account of the global environmental context, show that this is clearly in our national interest. There is a net benefit to our economy and continued economic growth by implementing strong, ambitious targets that are achievable. And that's why we've recommended a range from 62% to 70%, because against that emissions backdrop is continued strong economic growth and increased outputs from every sector of the economy by volume and value, notwithstanding these emissions reduction cuts. This is economically rational, this is environmentally responsible, and it's in the national interest. And that's a good policy, if you ask me.
Yeah, and it has to build up lots of local jobs, at least while the transition's going on, ranging from very skilled jobs, managing billions of dollars of investment down to humble stuff like just competing with a robot to install solar panels. So I think there's just so many obvious opportunities. But in your conversations, I guess you must have talked to big business, the BCA and similar, and the individual companies. How do you think they think about it all?
Well, I think the BCA is very clearly making their statements known today, where they're saying this is an economic opportunity for Australia. They are behind clear targets backed in with the right policies. And that's what the government has signed up to. Today, they've put out their sector pathways plans. They've talked about their plans to get to net zero and to achieve these targets. They've accepted the Climate Change Authority's advice. And I welcome that, because the advice we've done is robust, it's grounded in science, and again, it's focused on future-proofing our industries, our economy, our way of life, and our planet. And that's something we should all be able to get behind.
We haven't got a huge amount of time, because I think you've got running from place to place. Just on the sectors, though, which do you think is going to be the most challenging? I mean, 50% of the emissions between now and 2035 are expected to come from the electricity grid, and that will sort of in turn do indirect benefits to other sectors such as transport and things like that. Is the biggest challenge building enough renewables to take us close to 100% net renewables? Is the biggest challenge getting the amount of EVs that you want on the road, you've modelled on the road? Is it in industry and land? Or where's the hard part, the really hard part?
Look, I think the major focus needs to be now in bringing the whole community along this journey. If this gets a Team Australia approach, we can hit the top end of the range. I've got no doubt about that. We've got a government that has put in place the policy architecture that can build out the renewables, drive a greater uptake of EVs, help our industrial emitters be able to decarbonise. And what we need to see now is business leading in and the community leading in. If we do that, then I'm confident we'll be able to not only hit the target, but hit the top end of the range and hopefully overachieve. And one thing I will say to you on this call is that anyone who's saying that this is not ambitious is kidding themselves. This range positions Australia as a global leader on climate action with a higher ambition than most advanced countries. We can leverage our country's natural gifts that are capable of supercharging a renewable energy transition and a march towards net zero. And in doing so, do our bit for the planet whilst continuing to grow our economy.
I guess the argument would be that we need to be ambitious because of what's at stake and the opportunities in front of us, but maybe we could have been more ambitious.
Well, it's about ensuring that what we are putting forward is ambitious, it's achievable, it's steeped in science, and it brings the broad cross-section of the community along. That's how we're going to hit the targets. That's how we're going to do our bit for the planet and continue to grow our economy. We're ground truth this. It's robust economic body modelling by our scientists.
Where does this word ground truth come from? Is that a new one?
Well, I think it's a way to explain what's happened when you're talking to industry. You're testing the technologies and the assumptions in your model, and so that what you come up with is robust, and the public can have confidence that this is in the national interest.
Matt, we're probably out of time because you have other appointments and commitments. We do thank you very much for taking time out to talk to us and through us listeners. And congratulations on your work, and we look forward to further update. What's next for you now?
Now the next bit of work that the Climate Change Authority is focused on is the annual progress report, where we make recommendations to the government about the policies that they need to pursue to be able to deliver on these commitments. So there's no rest from now. We continue to put forward ideas and policies that will help us to get where we need to go, to do so in a way that continues to grow our prosperity.
It's a great report, Matt. It's a great report, and you've done a great job. But I wish to heck you'd stayed in politics. I think Australia would be an even better place.
Flattery will get you everywhere. And let me throw a bit back at you guys without wanting to turn this into the Mutual Appreciation Society. I really appreciate the work that you and Giles do, David. It is incredible. It is the go-to podcast on energy transition. I listen to it religiously, and I want to thank you for continuing to be a voice of reason in this complex area of public policy.
Well, if you keep on talking like that, then you can come back. Thank you very much, Matt Kean, our chair of the Climate Change Authority. And good luck with the next iteration.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks, David.
You are listening to the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles Parkinson and David Leitch. David, okay, what did you make of all that then? I'd just like to preface something that I did get a text message from Energy Minister Chris Bowen during the week saying he was horrified and mortified at the very suggestion that he wasn't listening to all the podcasts. So you should stand corrected. I don't know whether you need to make a formal apology, but the target, was it good enough?
The target. Look, I think it's achievement of the target that matters more than the target itself. It's the policy, it's achievement, it's the hard work. I think perhaps the most interesting thing that Matt said on that interview was bringing everyone along on the journey, that if we work as Australia, which we never can do, and we should never all be of one voice, we should have, there's plenty of room for alternative views, but basically, to the extent that we agree that it's in our interests to reduce carbon emissions, then we can achieve a lot. And it is more important. I do absolutely believe in the under-promising, over-achieving thing. I would far rather achieve a 60% target by 2035, which, let's face it, is about 9 or 10 years away, depending on how you count. It's not very long to do a hell of a lot. To get to 80% renewable electricity by 2030 seemed easier a couple of years ago than it does today. Targets, it's really, really hard work it's reshaping the whole economy. People who think you just flick a switch and wouldn't it be wonderful and we need more ambition. This is ambitious,
and it needs to be because, as I think I said in the end of the interview with Matt Kean, it needs to be because of the science and because of what's included in the climate report and the climate risk report,
and because of the opposition.
Because of the opposition, absolutely.
Right, people fight you every step of the way. You're not just fighting the bloody climate and global warming. You're fighting vested interests and people who just don't. It seems to me sometimes actually care or what's in it for the future generations, or believe that the risks to the future generations are vastly overstated, or they don't care about the stewardship of the earth that we, the lucky generation, are entrusted with.
That's true enough. Hey, just on some of the other reports, the clean capacity investment scheme. What was it? God, Giles, get it together. You can see I'm sick. 4 gigawatts, 16 gigawatt hours, 16 projects. Some of them are kind of already sort of under construction or about to be under construction and well advanced. This seems to be part of the capacity investment scheme that works.
Well, because anything to do with batteries is working at the moment. Like you go to a wind conference, as we're going to hear, and there's a huge amount of talk about batteries.
Solar
these
batteries
days,
too.
you know. You ask Chris Bowen what's working, it'll be the home battery scheme, you know. Success has many parents, you know, and everything's going wonderfully there. So I think the batteries will be built, and they're all going to be needed. I think it takes if they are all built in the NEM, it will take the total up towards about, I guess, 16 gigawatts in total, maybe a little more. That's quite a lot considering average demand for power, even at the peak in Australia at the moment, is about 22 gigawatts. So leave lots of energy. I think there's lots of other things that need to be done, but good, let's get on with it. I'm personally I don't care about batteries. That's great. It's wonderful. I was talking about batteries before they were a thing, you know, like, and as you probably were too, but I know I was because I spoke at an IPART conference and Frank Calabria came and said, that's a good idea afterwards, you know.
Well, good to see that he's finally building a battery then.
Yeah, that's right. But the real thing is that we need to get other bulk energy generation. I will never get sick of saying this. So
and that is the problem. Yes, wind particularly.
Wind particularly, because wind will operate in the evening peak. There is a price signal for stuff to operate during the evening peak and overnight. You cannot close the coal generators, no matter how badly they are running, until you've got replacement supply. When at the moment, when something goes out in Victoria, what happens? The Mortlake gas plant has to run, and or some gas, and you know it's expensive and not the right outcome. We need lots more wind.
And you've actually written a really interesting piece looking at electricity futures and the prices there, and you're suggesting that maybe the market's not thinking that Eraring and Yallourn are going to close as advertised.
As hard as I work, Giles, I'm always hesitant. The more you know, the more you know, the less confident you are of your answers, if I can put it that way. I'm not sure that what the message in those futures is, or whether, but at the moment, what you can say is that there's no signal in the futures that suggests that Eraring in particular will close. That's not to say that it won't close in 2027. It's just that you can't read any such signal in the futures.
Interesting stuff. Talking of wind, offshore wind became a bit of a focus this week. We were expecting this month to hear the details of the first offshore wind auction in Victoria, which of course has a legislation target. I think, is it 2 gigawatts by 2032, 4 by 2035, 9 by 2040 or something like that. I might have got those numbers wrong, but it was delayed. Announced by Lily D'Ambrosio at the Global Wind Energy Conference in Melbourne, and we caught up with Andy Evans, wind pioneer, one of the founders of the Star of the South project, and all-round kind of media and events entrepreneur as well now. So anyway, let's have a listen to our conversation with Andy. Andy Evans, thank you very much for joining the Energy Insiders podcast.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks, David. Great to be talking to you again.
Well, look, in a very busy week, ranging from carbon bombshells approved in the Northwest Shelf to climate impact reports and finally the emissions reduction target, somehow you managed to fit in a wind conference, the Global Wind Energy Council, quite an important gig for the Asia Pacific, was held in Melbourne this for 3 days, actually. What was the vibe?
Look, it started a bit flat. Pardon the pun, but a bit of the wind was sucked out of the event the first morning with the Victorian State Energy Minister pushing back the much expected commencement of the CFD auction for offshore wind in Victoria to be reviewed.
And this would have been the first auction, the long-awaited, very first auction for offshore wind in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was long-awaited, Giles. I mean, there was legislation put in place in 2022 stating that these auctions would be occurring. So they had timelines of 2032 for first energisation, 2035, 2040. So to have delays to the auctions with no certainty on when they will occur, highly deflating, particularly for those developers like Star of the South. We've been going for 13 years and well and truly ready to go. So very deflating.
I mean, Star of the South, and you were involved in that because you're one of the co-founders of that project, I think, and still are involved in it. That's probably the best bet for Victoria to even reach its first target, which I think is a couple of gigawatts by 2032.
Yeah, correct, Giles. Look, really, it's the Trojan horse for the rest of the industry. I don't want to look, I'm still involved as one of the main shareholders, but really that project really needs to get up for the rest of the industry to progress. So we're lucky we've got very patient shareholders. Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners have been running the project for 8 years. Yeah, very committed and great partners. So
yeah. I'm going to hand over to David very quickly, but I did get some sense that some people weren't too unhappy with the delay, mainly because if it went off half-assed, as it were, then it would cause even more damage to the industry. And considering what's probably happened in overseas offshore wind auctions, and also, to be frank, what's suspected to have happened in the first capacity investment scheme. In other words, projects coming in, bidding too low, promising something they can't quite deliver.
Yeah, I mean, look, I fundamentally disagree with those, and I know the companies that are quite happy with it.
Because they're the ones that are behind you and want to catch up. Is that right?
Totally? They just haven't been here and haven't done the work. And look, realistically, their success is reliant on the Star of the South success and some of the other leading projects that are out there. So we can't wait forever trying to get things perfectly right. I would say waiting 13 years, Giles, since we co-founded the project, is long enough. We've had 3 years of legislation to get things right. So I think there's been plenty of time. So we're happy to go off and make a number of other decisions with very little research, but offshore wind farms are up and going in about 17 or 18 countries. This has all been done before. We've got that many reference points. We've got all the largest offshore wind farm developers and investors here in the country. So we're right to go. So we should just crack on.
And so what did Lily say were the reasons for the delay?
Look, it was referred to as developers requesting the delay. I can fundamentally say, even though I don't sit on board level or heavily involved, that's not the case with Star of the South and at least 2 others, those that would rightly be called the forerunners. Look, just clear, we've all been aware for a while there is disagreement between the state and the federal government about underwriting it. I would have thought, I'm simple, it's a state piece of legislation. I would have thought it's a state expenditure requirement, but those discussions will go on. So that there is fundamental support in Victoria and at a Commonwealth level with Minister Bowen about the importance of offshore wind. It's just funding it at the moment. So that was the other reason, David, that was put forward.
So essentially, Lily, Minister D'Ambrosio, didn't feel that there was enough confidence that Victoria would be able to fund it as things stood.
That's what seemed to come through. Look, Lily, the Minister's been a great supporter of offshore wind for a long while and continues to be. So, look, we hope there's those resolutions that are really needed to kick things off. Look, it just needs to be kicked off very soon. When you look at a lot of the expenditure that may come, it's not for years, but it does actually give the incentivisation that there is a revenue stream in place further down the track to allow developers to go and spend $200 to $300 million each under a feasibility license to get to an FID.
Yes, look, I think my views are reasonably well known, and I've explored with you guys issues around that. So I don't see any point in discussing that exactly at the moment. But I would, unless there's points that you want to make, because I'm sure you've listened to our discussion about the cost of offshore wind as compared to other alternatives, and for me, it's a very important point. I've always felt that offshore wind has a great role to play globally, but a lesser one in Australia. That's always been my point of view, and nothing's so far convinced me to change that. But unless there's some point that you want to make about that, there probably is. Let me just pause there.
I'll just say, look, a coalition government saw it fit 4 years ago to put this legislation in place, and I think everyone sort of understands these decisions with nation-changing projects aren't just based on LCOEs or other things. I mean, we're looking at jobs and investment for regional areas that are important. And when we look at the number or the scale of the size as well, David, we're not talking about it being a massive contributor to the overall energy mix, particularly by the time that we're looking about when the projects will come on board. So I think a lot of people, particularly I'm a city dweller, really don't understand a lot of the regional challenges with closing major industries such as coal, Gippsland, Hunter Valley. You go to those areas, they want new jobs. So we need to understand, if we wanted the cheapest, we'd eat 2-minute noodles every night. So we've got to understand there are greater things involved in how we evolve as a nation.
Yes, I will just say I've studied myself, as have many economists, and I'm not an economist, I'm a financial analyst. Old industries close, in mining industries, in communities close very regularly. As I'm sure you know, the Welsh coal industries closed, the Newcastle Steelworks closed, and GDP went massively ahead after that. The coal industry is largely closed in Virginia, and things happened. Whatever our problems in Australia, when you think they're mining 4 billion tonnes of coal in China and employ millions of workers, what a challenge that's going to be for them. So I don't believe myself that the fact that an industry, I mean, even in Victoria, in the Latrobe Valley, the Hazelwood power station closed, and my understanding is there's more people employed in Latrobe Valley overall now than there were before that closed. But some people don't get new jobs. Some people leave. Some people retrain and stay in the area. I mean, that's the nature of life in a capitalist economy, which Australia still bears some vague resemblance to. Let me move on for that, because I'll get off my soapbox. But I do think those are facts, that industries do close regularly, and people have to adjust. Coming to coal mines that close, there's sackings and retrenchments in coal mines in Queensland right now that are affecting workers up there, and those people just have to live with it. And to deal with the consequences. But the conference itself wasn't just about offshore wind, was it?
No, a lot of onshore, a lot of, obviously, battery projects are really key, and have been obviously a much bigger talking point and part of the solution supporting the growth of wind energy. So there was a lot on batteries as well. A lot of regional, there's some great announcements from Vietnamese and Filipino ministers as well. So it was very regional as well, David, not just specifically related to Australia.
Right. And so perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about what the vibe was about onshore wind. I mean, offshore wind's probably got a great role in Vietnam. I don't know. I know it. It's probably the industry that can rescue Japan if they'd only ever recognise it. So give us a few more of your thoughts about the conference overall and the messages that came through from it.
Well, after a tough beginning, it became very positive. So a lot of it was read about the socialisation, about rollout of wind energy as well. Look, I mean, I hate the word social license because most people think it's a piece of paper when it's more about communication and relationships and working with everybody. But that was most of the discussion points. We're looking at some really large numbers of, whether it's step change scenarios or other regional requirements for the rollout. It's more, how do we actually work to get these projects up? How do we communicate them, at government level, but more important at regional level as well? So that was a key discussion point. Look, sadly, with a number of these discussions, they can go round and round with people using catchphrases such as social license. But we were getting good insights in a number of areas. I mean, it's very different when you look at states like Queensland with a newer government in place, and some of the more philosophical issues around stakeholder and community engagement and how that impacts, the Christopher government and some of the decisions they've made, compared to look in Victoria, where you've got an overlay of a lot of new authorities now stepping in, like VicGrid have been around for 4 years and finally corporatised, I think, yesterday under legislation. It's trying to work out who fits in where and who we should all listen to. And I think that's the challenge, and we'll get into talking about multiple reports over the last week.
Well, you should listen to the Energy Insiders podcast, but beyond that, there are probably a few other voices that count too.
So, a lot of it was around understanding how we actually build things up. I mean, it's less about the technology these days. A lot of these conferences were how big things are going to get and the scale. Now it's about how do you actually roll it out. A lot around investment as well, understanding is the money still there, which it appears to be. But we do live in a world which is very fractious, nearly every place you go to. And that has an impact on Australia. I think it was sought to be denied off the back of the last election. But I think a lot of the political and geopolitical things happening around the world do impact Australia. And I think people are actually starting to understand them.
And so, just staying with Australia, but I am interested in the other countries and points that you want to make. I'm very interested. But how do you see from where you are what's going to happen in Victoria now the offshore wind has been delayed? I mean, there's a lot of talk about the closure of your lawn in 2028, and it hasn't been running that well, just for every, outputs going down. In fact, outputs going down from Loy Yang B as far as it goes, although it still operates incredibly efficiently. There must be a vibe about what's going to happen.
Well, I don't think anyone's overly alarmist. I think that's one thing that's become a bit better the last few years. Less of the discussion points around wind and renewables is more about economically is obviously, and which is a strong point of yours, David. I mean, there is a lot of that economic argument about how the industry has to reshape itself. Certainly from a Victorian point of view, obviously there's less talk about current system. It's all, what's the new one going to look like? But I think there was a recognition on the offshore wind side of things that things do need to happen. I think most of the investors that are here are patient investors, but I think we're going to have to marry that up against reality to actually get things going. So
what do we make of a couple of people have left? Some of them, it seemed to me, to have been sort of smaller players or maybe big players with big voices, but never actually installed a single turbine anywhere in the world. And they're kind of sort of, land grabbers or ocean grabbers, if I could say. But you lost Equinor, for instance, as a partner on the floating thing in New South Wales. So what do we make of all of that? Does Equinor's withdraw because they've got issues elsewhere? Do we worry about the small players leaving, the rats and mice?
Yeah, look, I mean, there weren't too many small players. I mean, Bluefloat was a newer entity that had gone around the world and won a lot of approvals. The industry probably hadn't shaped the way their PE owners expected it within their 3 to 5 year window that PE often operates in. I think a lot of the players that have exited have been more of that offshore oil and gas background who've gone back to their core business, which is still extremely profitable. So that's been a major thing. And look, I think one of the points we will get to, we're looking at the, emissions reduction or the advice that's being adopted and the risk assessment is that, look, there fundamentally needs to be a lot more local investment because when we're looking at climate change and all the stuff we're going to be talking about, they're very personal invested interests of Australians in Australia. One of the issues we have is that we don't have that high level of Australian investment coming in that we want to stay the course for the betterment of Australia. That's always been an issue. Look, you obviously don't get many Australian super funds, so some of the wealthiest in the world's actually directly investing here in Australia. So when we do get to the crunch of whether you want to be here, for a lot of internationals who we love and are great because they've seen the issues before that we haven't seen about transitioning, they're probably more inclined to look at things closer to home or more easily and closer to revenue. So that's a fundamental issue we've always had, but that's going to be one of the real hows that we have to deal with when we're looking at, say, 2035 emissions reduction and how we get there.
So if floating wind's probably not going to get up anytime soon?
I think it's a challenge, Giles, unfortunately. It is a challenge. Look, I mean, the costs have, it's an early technology. So a lot of the costs are still going through their whole investigative phase. So I'm happy to be very open about that. It's a challenge. It's large infrastructure. Look, it was a great achievement here. Look, we were the first floating rights in the Southern Hemisphere ever in offshore wind. So there's only really 4 to 5 jurisdictions that have looked at it when you look at, Scotland, Norway, South Korea, and California. So getting New South Wales on the map was great. It was unfortunate. Look, we'd still like to think, whether it's through an R&D process, which the ministers announced, licenses will probably be released or open for applications late this year or early next year, that there are opportunities there. But for R&D, it's not going to be technology-based. I mean, you've got all the technology leaders overseas. Why would they come to Australia to do it? I think there's some great opportunities about R&D around economic development and commercialisation for regions. But even with R&D licenses, I'm supportive of them, but I think it's still going to be a bit of a challenge to really progress floating in particular.
We're probably going to wrap up pretty soon because we're actually doing a double barrel interview this week.
Well, I'd just like to check for the onshore wind industry in Australia. Did you get a sense that there was a burst of investment and projects getting started soon? Because at the end of the day, that's the be-all and end-all. I'm happy to experiment with offshore wind, you know what I mean, but achieving our emissions reduction 82% by 2030, basically depends on getting stuff built so we can close old stuff. That's really very simple.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity out there, David. You look at, there's a lot of even newer companies with CIP, with Voyager Renewables in particular, looking at building portfolios really quickly. A lot of them are still very much at the origination phase, but you've had a lot of companies out there for a long while. It's surprising how many onshore wind developers are actually out there progressing things. And a lot of them have been in the system for a long time and are still some of the best sites.
And if we've just, of the offshore countries that you looked at, or the conference sort of, which one seemed the most promising to you as for wind investment?
Well, certainly in Asia Pacific. Some of the newer countries like Vietnam and the Philippines have been out there and on the radar for 5 years, but they're really pressing ahead with some targets and are keen to do it. They'll have their own challenges, obviously, with land-based infrastructure, given there's not the offshore infrastructure. And look, I think Vietnam, it's been well documented. It's really challenging. But Taiwan's got 4 operating offshore wind farms, and that's the frustrating point for me. It's great for Taiwan, but they only started their industry in 2017 and they had no offshore oil and gas. But they've got 4 operating offshore wind farms. South Korea is still there, still looking at floating a lot. Japan is progressing as well. They've had 3 or 4 rounds of auctions. So of the newer investables, it's more, I expect Vietnam and Philippines to really kick on a lot more in the next few years.
And just finally, Andy, you're dabbling in a few other things now, film festivals and energy festivals.
Yeah, look, I think David's having a 16-year-old daughter, Giles, but look, I'm understanding about new ways of communicating with the next generation every day.
How's that working for you?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge. It's a daily process. You might equate it to dealing with some governments as well. It sort of changes week to week. But yeah, look, I think we're just going to have a different way of communicating, particularly in renewables in the energy space. People source their information from varied spots these days, and it's whoever speaks the loudest and the longest gets heard, and that's not always the right message. So
as much as we invest in economics and software, in technology and experiments, I think myself, Australia has a great opportunity to invest in social skills and social education, and understanding how to educate, bring people along on the journey. One way to do it is Mao Zedong way, where you just put everyone in a square and yell at them through a megaphone, and the other way is to bring people, it's all the modern things and insights. It's a very skilled industry. I think people with engineering degrees simply don't understand the subtleties sometimes and the skills and attributes that part of the population brings.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, much like you, I just wish filmmaking, running festivals was outlook, and having media companies was cheaper and as glamorous as what everybody thought. But yeah, we do just need to communicate differently.
Mm. Andy, we've got to wrap it up there because we've got to get ready for our next interview and on emissions target. So look, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck, and hope we get that auction away sometime soon.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks, David.
And that was Andy Evans from, I guess you could say from Star of the South and a whole bunch of other businesses. David, you're very sceptical about offshore wind. I'm not too sure what this means. Andy's obviously very frustrated with the fact that the auction got delayed. Others are sort of seem to be quite delighted because it gives them time to catch up. Yes, I'm not too sure what to make of it all.
So it's not. Offshore wind good. Economics cost of offshore wind a lot less good, and that's the problem. And so my question then is, I hope Victoria has worked out what it's going to do instead, because as we discussed a little bit in the podcast, your lawn is still due to close in 2028. I don't think it's running quite as well as it would like to. It probably needs to close. So we need some more projects to get going in Victoria quickly, and yet we've seen delays in BNI West and Western Renewables Link, so
Yes, more of the only thing that we're seeing actually sort of approved and getting built and construction starts is these solar
batteries.
And solar batteries, solar hybrids. One of the things that came out of that conference, we didn't really talk about it with Andy, was the sort of the expected PPA price. We heard it as well up in Queensland, around about $110, $120 a megawatt hour. That makes it pretty hard.
I think that was the price I pretty much came up with when I looked at wind costs in this
Well,
week.
maybe they're
I
quoting
don't
you
think
then.
No, I don't think so. I think it's where the data gets to. And, I'm still hopeful that again, if we do things well, there will be some scope to actually lower costs by just building things steadily, getting a learning rate going, and moving from one big wind project to another. But we've got to start with one big wind project. The trouble is, when you look at them, so many of them have got other issues. I mean, if you look at those ones in the Southwest Renewable Zone, they are in New South Wales, where the transmission will be available in 2027. None of the projects are actually going to be ready to connect to that in 2027. They've either got planning issues, like Yanko Delta has got to go back into planning. But in fact, most of the developers who've got them approval don't have enough money to actually build the things, so they've got to bring in a finance partner, and you've got to get the PPA or even if they've got a CIS award, it's probably not quite enough. So, it's a frustrating piece of work trying to get $3 or $4 billion worth of construction going. And it certainly takes longer to get these big projects started than the smaller ones. So we just
$110, $120. I mean, how many years ago was it when Origin Energy sort of revealed low 50s for Stockyard Hill? And
the last time they actually started a commissioned a project, which was so long ago we can't even remember.
But how clever was the ACT government, though? I mean, they've locked in PPAs, non-inflationary, for as low as $60 for wind. Often say that if you act first, you might pay a premium, but I think in this case, they've done absolutely brilliantly.
No, I agree with that. And I think the reason why, you look at the South Australian League of Project Interconnect, it was certainly a lot cheaper than the New South Wales League. I think avoiding the rush is sensible. But if you're in the rush, then you've got to do it in a very organised and logistical and steady sequenced way. Sequencing. There's going to be a big reward for people who are good at execution going forward for the next couple of years.
Good. Calling all people good at execution then. Come on down and build some stuff. David, thank you very much for, excuse my coughing. I managed to get through most of the podcast without coughing and spluttering. Although I can see that I'm actually bright red, but there you go. Thanks to Matt Kean and to Andy Evans for joining us. Thanks for everyone listening out there. Thanks, of course, to our sponsors, Pylon and Evergen. And we'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week. Bye for now.